From the John DeVito Broadcast Center, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another broadcast of Armchair Experts with Jim Leon and Rich Massaro on the Windy City Hometown Entertainment Network and Jack FM 89.7 WRHS FM Norwich on Wednesday, October the 26th, the year 2016. And now, here they are, live in person, breathing on their own, Jim and Rich.
And all excited. But I know we're having kind of a special edition of Armchair Experts today because I know, Rich, you're probably very upset that Joique Bell was released by the Bears today.
Joique Bell was released by the Bears
yes,
today?
Yeah. I know that's a thing of concern for you.
Jim, you know what, though? When you say this, I think to myself, people will. We've all been in conversations where they'll say, "Oh man, those guys make a lot of money," and you know the inference is, "Boy, they got the world by the short hairs." You know what? Think about a lot of these guys. You were a star in high school. You're a star in college. You get into the pros. Maybe you start out well. I think Joique Bell probably had a year or two, maybe one good year or something.
Yeah, I think so.
And all of a sudden, maybe you're injured or they draft somebody who's a little bit hotter commodity than you, and now your life becomes almost gypsy-like. You're living on the fringe.
Yeah, you become a journeyman. You go to the next place on Tuesday morning and see if you can catch on.
So for a lot of these guys, well, put it this way. I'd say for almost all these guys, whether you're a star or whether you're a guy who makes that circuit that you're talking about, Jim, it's not. I don't think it's as glamorous a life as everybody thinks. It's a job. You devote a lot of hours to it. You get a lot of criticism, probably more than your average worker does. Your average American worker. So it's when you say that, it just rang that bell with me. It's not the glamorous thing all the time that everybody thinks it is.
No. So we have more important things that we can kind of get into today. Mm-hmm. Certainly, we're doing this on Tuesday. This show's going to be on Wednesday, but we're doing it on Tuesday. So game one will already be in the books.
Yes, it will. Now, John Lester versus Corey Kluber?
Yeah.
John Lester, who's possibly, I think he's probably going to be the Cy Young Award winner.
I think there's a good chance. I think there's a good chance.
Versus former Cy Young Award winner Corey Kluber.
Yeah.
The interesting thing for me, Jim, is I've said all through this year and a couple years how much I admire what Terry Francona has done with that Cleveland club, because I've said on numerous occasions that team stinks. I mean,
and a lot of people in Cleveland.
I meant it as a compliment to Francona because I don't think their talent level is that great. But look at what they've done.
Look at what he managed to pull out of them. What do you? The rosters, the Cubs roster was announced, and they're carrying 11 pitchers.
Mm-hmm. Good, that's good.
Arrieta, Chapman, Edwards, Justin Grimm, Kyle Hendricks, could be the Cy Young Award winner.
Mm-hmm.
John Lackey, John Lester, Mike Montgomery, Hector Rondon, Pedro Strop, and Travis Wood. 3 catchers, Wilson Contreras, Miguel Montero, and David Ross. 5 infield, Javier Baez, Chris Bryant, Anthony Rizzo, Addison Russell, Ben Zobrist. 6 outfielders, Albert Almora, Chris Coghlan, Dexter Fowler, Jason Hayward, Jorge Soler, and
it's Kyle Schwarber.
Babe Effin Schwarber.
Wow. I knew this was going to come up because I knew that they were going to announce the World Series roster. I'm really, put it this way. I'm confident in the Cubs management. I mean, I'm talking about the people who made the roster decisions. Because as a fan, somebody who's not close to the situation, I'm thinking, boy, is this just a stretch? Because Schwarber has not taken that many swings. He was in Arizona, right, for the Fall League.
Yeah, played 2 games.
And now you're putting him into, the real white heat spotlight of the World Series. And now, was Soler on that roster? No,
yeah.
Who got knocked off position-wise?
Nobody position-wise.
Nobody, because they're only taking 11 pitchers.
Right, Zastryzny.
That's So is Listella one of the infielders?
No,
Okay, but
No.
he wasn't in this last round.
he wasn't in the last round either.
Okay, as you announced the roster, I guess this is professional sports, and somebody when something like this happens, obviously somebody's going to get aced out because Schwarber hasn't been there basically all year. But I trust the Cubs management to say this guy's ready to go. From a fan standpoint, my thinking was, geez, you're knocking somebody who was there all year off the roster. How does that go down?
Right.
But I trust this Cubs management to do the right thing, and if they think he's ready, then I guess he's ready.
It was interesting on the way over here, and I can't think of the guy's name now. The name just popped out of my head. But he's written a book, and he's very much into analytics, and you can tell by it because he talked like 5,000 words a minute.
Okay.
But the book itself sounds interesting. And he said that the idea of analytics, sabermetrics, all other, is to a certain extent take the emotion out of the decision making. So, but you have to trust your decision makers. Mm-hmm. You have to trust your scouts. You have to trust your front office. You have to trust your coaching staff to decide, is the guy ready? Mm-hmm. Now, apparently they think he is. The other thing that I thought about, too, and somebody brought this up in I was thinking about that, and somebody brought it up on a phone call when I was listening. So they get back to Chicago. Say he goes 0 for 8. Get back to Chicago, and he says, his knee swelled up. He's got to go on the DL. We need to replace him with somebody.
Yeah.
I assume that would be allowed. I don't know.
I think it's been done in the past.
I think it has to.
I've been totally wrong this whole season. We guys were talking about this way, months ago. That I've heard people say Schwarber will be back for the World Series, but that's not Schwarber so much. But didn't it used to be? And this came in where the trade deadline, not the trade deadline, but when you had to make all waiver wire deals prior to September 1st for a player to be eligible for the playoffs. Now, Schwarber would not come under that because he played 3 or 4 games to start the season.
He played 3 or 4 games, went on the 60-day DL.
Right.
Now, I don't know. I assume if he went on the 60-day DL, that also maintained him on the 40-man roster.
Okay.
Which may have made him
eligible. Now, the other thing is, though, I thought at one time, and when you had the World Series, it really didn't come into play because you had your roster. It was a 7-game thing, and that was it. But
it was right after the season.
In the playoff era, I always thought that the same rules applied as in the World Series era, if you want to put it that way, that your roster, say for the first round of games this year in the Cubs case, would be your roster all the way through. I don't know when those rules changed.
I don't recall that either. I kind of remember that same thing. Mm. That you used to have to maintain your roster all the way through. This was your roster, boom. Because wasn't there the whole issue back in the 70s, which was the playoff roster, with the A's, when Charlie Finley wanted to replace Mike Andrews?
Yeah.
And they were trying to say he was injured.
Yes. Yeah, I remember that. They did have an issue with that. And, geez, you know what, Jim? I think it's changed. I thought that even back when the playoffs started, and I would think this would have be something that just evolved. I would say back when you're talking about the 70s, so that would be right after the era of just strictly the World Series.
Right. This is where you'd have your 2 division winners meet.
Right. You probably would have had to have your team set, and that would have been your team for both the playoffs and the series.
That's what I was wondering.
And it's just been recently, let's put it that way, that I've noticed that they can, you say the first 5 games set in, this year for the Cubs or whoever, that group is set, but then that can change for the next for the championship series, and again, obviously, it can change for the World Series.
Yeah.
So interesting. I don't find anything really wrong with it. I think
No,
actually
no,
you
I
want
don't
to
think
see
so
the
either.
best possible
Yeah.
group out there.
You want to see your best. You want to see your best players out there. I mean, think about it as a comparison. How many guys, if you get into the Stanley Cup playoffs, how many guys
That's
might
true.
suddenly, oh, he's a healthy scratch tonight.
Yeah, no, but that means he could still come back.
He
the
can
next
come
game
back the
or
next
whatever.
game because we just want to get a better matchup.
Right. I think it's actually a really positive thing.
I think it is too. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. So
Jim, I have to mention this to you though. Yes, I think it must have been in the Sunday Sun Times. We're sitting there having coffee Sunday morning, and Jim Kelly, in the deal, I guess where all the small print
Yeah.
stuff is in the deals section, he starts looking, and he starts out. He says World Series home run leader, which is Mickey Mantle still with 18. And then he started going over all the lists, and I can't remember what the category was. It might have been World Series hits. 10 guys listed. 9 out of the 10 guys were Yankees. The only other guy listed was Duke Snyder, which makes sense because the
Dodgers were in it a lot in those
numerous,
days
series
when Snyder was
when
around.
Snyder was around. And then I think he even was in at least one after they left Brooklyn. He was with the Dodgers in
59, the 59 Dodgers, sure.
But it was, it's mind-boggling, and most of the guys are obviously 40s and 50s era guys, and Gehrig and Ruth, of course, have and DiMaggio have some of those are in on some of those records as well. But it just makes you shake your head, the phenomenal success of the Yankees.
Yeah.
you know.
Dana was asking me the other day when we were talking about it, and I mentioned about the Yankees, and she said, "Well, she says, what was their streak?" And I said, "Well, because we were talking about Cleveland being in the World. I mentioned about Cleveland being in the World Series, and this is their 4th time since I can remember, and they haven't won." But she said, "Well, what was the Yankee streak?" And I said, as I think about it, I said from 47 to 64 or 5?
64.
64. The only time they weren't in it was 48,
48 and 54.
54, 59.
I'm sorry, 59. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they were, because when we were kids, they were just at the end of their real powerhouse days. They had okay, I don't remember the 50. Oh, I guess I vaguely remember the 58 World Series. But 59, of course, the Sox and the Dodgers. 60, the
Pirates.
Yankees dominate the series, but lose
Lose
to the Pirates.
Lose Game
on
7.
Maz's home run.
Yeah.
61 was the year where they were just so darn dominant, and they beat the Reds in
4
61.
game. I think the Reds got 1-1 ball.
They might have
game.
won a game. 62, they did win, but it was a close one.
That was a great
against
series
the,
against the Giants.
The Giants. Willie McCovey hit a blue streak for the last out that Bobby Richardson caught.
Two of my favorite Peanuts comics came after that series. Charlie Brown and Linus sitting on a curb looking dejected for like 3 panels. And the 4th panel, Charlie Brown jumps up and yells, "Why couldn't McCovey have hit that ball 2 feet higher?"
Yeah.
And about 2 weeks later, same sequence. Last panel was something like, "Why couldn't McCovey have even hit that ball 1 foot higher?"
And I 63, believe they lost to the Dodgers. 64, they lost to the Cardinals.
Yeah.
And then it didn't seem like it to me at the time. Of course, the team was going to go downhill anyway because the guys were getting older and they weren't really replenishing from the farm system.
Yeah, at 65 they didn't make it because 64, after the Cardinals won in 64, That's when Johnny Keane quit and took the Yankees job.
Yeah, and from everything I've read, as good a manager as Johnny Keane was with the Cardinals, the Yankees just couldn't stand him.
Right.
And because the Yankees under Berra, or doesn't matter who they were under, with the group of guys they had, Mantle and Ford and those guys who were party guys, the managers were sort of smart enough to say, okay, these guys do a lot of partying, but they're ready to come and play when it's time to play. And Johnny Keane was sort of, cracking the whip, and they really didn't take to that too well.
And Johnny Keane was an outsider.
He was an outsider.
Johnny Keane wasn't a Yankee guy.
No, and they didn't like that. And they liked Yogi. There was a lot of talk at the time that they took advantage of Yogi because he was their buddy. But I think if you read a little bit about it, at the end they realized, well, wait a minute, he's running the show. We got to really sort of buckle down here, and they did it. And I remember them coming into town, and late in the season, I think it was probably August, and getting swept by the Sox here, and really. That's when the whole Phil Linz incident happened, which was really sort of blown out of proportion.
I forgot about that. Well, with the harmonica.
Yeah, the harmonica.
the infamous harmonica.
The infamous harmonica.
It bounced
people
off.
Today listen to this and they're probably going, what the heck? That was an infamous incident
compared
to things that are going on today.
Oh, my gosh. When that got swatted out of his hands.
And it hit, Ford or Mantle in the knee?
Hit Ford, I think, in the knee, and he jumped up yelling, "Oh, you broke my widow knee!"
My poor little knee. Oh, my gosh. Those guys had to be a trip.
And the wheels were off.
The wheels were off.
Yeah.
But they got them back together.
Yeah. I forgot about that. I forgot about that one completely.
And then they went downhill, and they were a good 10 years in the pits. And then the mid-'70s, they started to come back a bit.
60, I think 67, they finished last.
Yeah.
And that's about the time. Well, during that period of time, that's when CBS got control of the Yankees and bought them, and really
it just
really ran it
into the ground.
Ran it into the ground until Steinbrenner got his hands on could become. I think he may have been a minority partner in the CBS thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that, but he could have been. But as much as people want to talk about Steinbrenner in the negative, he was the guy, as you say, who really said, "Hey, we're going to come and turn this thing back around."
Yeah. Now we go into what we have here, and I won't try to find and play it, but it was it's kind of an interesting montage of clips put together by Chris Tannehill from The Score, and it was about a 4.5-minute clip of audio bites from the end of the 11th season, where you hear Len Casper and goes, "Well, that wraps it up for the season. The Cubs end the season in 5th place, 71 up, 91 down." Then the announcement of, then Tom Ricketts announcing that Theo was hired. And then Theo talking about the people that he's bringing on and saying very clearly, this is going to be a deep rebuild.
Mm-hmm.
And then starting to hear the clips, Chris Bryant, the announcement Chris Bryant is drafted, Kyle Schwarber being drafted, Wilson Contreras hitting a home run in the first pitch he looked at in the major leagues, and Bryant and Almora and all the highlights all the way up to Pat Hughes calling the double play Saturday night to win it. And you think about the whole period, and a word that was used frequently, so frequently when you listen to people talking about it, was, "This is unbelievable." And listening to the radio yesterday and listening to Bernstein, he kind of was getting on that. He said, "No," he said, "I hate to sound pedantic." He said, "This is not unbelievable. This is very believable with the ball club that was there. This was not, unbelievable. This was expected."
Yeah, Yeah, you're right.
And
He's right.
I understand his point.
Right.
And I couldn't get to a phone to call in. I understand his point, and I agreed with his point. But I think a caller got in there and said, and kind of put it in good terms. He said, it's unbelievable because all of us who have gone through this as Cub fans for however many years, and I probably
I don't
Cub
know, how
fan.
many years would you claim to be a Cubs
Well,
fan?
the first Cub game I went to was in August of 1959 on an afternoon game with my parents, and the Phillies beat them. I think it was 6-4, and I think the outfield that day was Moose Morin, Bobby Thompson, and Lee Walls. Handsome Ransom Jackson was a third baseman.
Okay.
Banks was at short. Tony Taylor was at second. Can't remember who was at first. Probably was Dale Long.
That would probably, yeah.
Yeah, and probably Cal Neiman behind the plate.
Yeah, that sounds like that's what it would have been.
But all of us that have gone through this, and it's and I could understand a point. It's unbelievable that from all we've seen in all the years, and I said 59 was the first game I saw in person. I probably started watching baseball because my dad had it on. I'd hang out, in the house probably when I was about 5. So 1956.
Mm-hmm.
In 56, 57 start to get the interest in the game. Unbelievable that we've come to that point. But the guy said, not only unbelievable, but with this team, inevitable.
Yeah. I sort of understand where Bernstein's coming from, though, because
I perfectly understand it.
I found after they clinched the going to the series the other night, I'm thinking, okay, I was happy. I wasn't as excited as I thought I would be, because I think I think what he's saying is this team is so good and has done so many things and sort of just how could you say it? They've reversed. Forget the curse. Forget Bartman. Forget all of the other stuff that's preceded it.
Yeah.
These guys just don't care.
They've
They've totally just gone over it, around it, through it, whatever term you want to say. So was I happy? I was happy as could be, but not as excited as I thought I would be. Yeah, I don't know if you can relate to that or not.
I to a certain extent, I was excited. I was very emotional. I'll admit, cried my eyes out through the ninth inning. Because I never, again, this is one of those things you can never imagine that your team is going to be at this point.
Yeah. Well, especially our team.
Our team for all
Cubs.
these years, that you never could imagine that it would be at this point. I mean, I think about, go back and you think about the collapse of '69, which I still say was not the worst collapse ever. I still say the 64 Phillies with a
that was way worse.
6.5 game lead with 12 to play.
Yeah,
you lose 10 in a row and
that's a collapse.
You lose 10 in a row and finish fourth.
Right. Right.
The Cub thing was like, I think one guy likened it to saying, watching your relative die of cancer. It was long and prolonged. You kept thinking, well, maybe they'll get better, maybe it'll come back, and it never did.
Yeah.
84, all you had to do was go out there and win one ball game.
Yeah.
One ball game, that's all it was, and you couldn't do it.
Yeah.
89, the Giants series, the Giants were the better ball club. But it was funny, and I was told Dana last night, I said back in those days I was working for Draper & Kramer, property management and real estate developer. And I had 3 trips that I wanted to get, that I was putting on my schedule in October. We had a couple of joint venture things, one with with somebody out in the San Francisco area and one in the Washington, D.C. area. And also had a trip because we had some things going down in Florida, and we wound up with some things which we had no business doing, but I'd make fairly frequent trips to Florida just to see what was going on there financially. But I had originally told I had originally told my secretary, I said, I'll tell you what, let's do...
Sorry,
That's
just keep going.
Let's do... Yeah, that's okay. Rich just has to get into this...
This is Mike Strawn.
Well,
Okay.
we'll talk to him.
We'll know something that we're interested in. I think after this.
We'll find
broadcast.
out. We'll find out shortly.
Yes.
But I had originally planned to go to I told my secretary, I'll tell you what, let's do this. We'll schedule San Francisco this period of time, and then I'll come back and the following, be here for a week, and then I'll go to D.C. for a few days and get that. I'll come back home, and then I'll go down to Florida near the end of the month. And, I thought about it, and I said, you know what? I said, let's do it this way. Let me get the Florida thing out of the way, do that, and then we'll go to D.C., and I'll finish up the month in San Francisco. So this was 89. I'm in Florida. It's the start of the World Series. And that's the 89 World Series, the Earthquake Series. And I'm listening to the game, driving from a restaurant to something else that night. And all of a sudden, the broadcast goes dead.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever station I was listening to, or the network or whatever, said, we're trying to find out what's going on. And then, they come back where we realize, okay, we've just discovered, we were just finding out that there was an earthquake in San Francisco, a very serious magnitude, so we're going to have to find out what's going on. And my first thought going through then was, well, one, I'm glad I'm not in San Francisco, and two, it'll teach the Giants for beating the Cubs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I would have been there for the earthquake, if that.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Who knows? Yeah.
89, Giants were the better ball club. There was no doubt. After that series was over, the better team won. 98, they got swept by the Braves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I remember that.
03, no reason to, you can't. I'm never going to blame poor Steve Bartman for what out there. I blame Alex Gonzalez for not being able to field a ground ball and turn a double play.
Now, I don't blame Bartman, but it's the what I do blame is that it how would you say, it folds so neatly into the
curse,
the curse, whole curse scenario.
Yes. Yeah.
And although Bartman has done a service, I think, to baseball in the sense that you don't see fans as eager to reach over and grab that ball anymore.
Yeah,
because they don't want to be Bartman.
They don't want to be. Yeah, the guy who sat in the seat the other night.
Yeah,
he's like.
Let me ask you this, Jim. I heard some people. This wasn't a conversation with you. I thought Joe Buck really leaned toward the Dodgers the first part of the series, but he really got into the whole history and of the Cubs, and I think he was on board, if that's what a national broadcaster is supposed to be, with the whole Cubs thing. By the last game of the series, I thought it was almost like if I was a Dodgers fan, I'd be mad like I was a Cubs fan
for the first part,
because he had totally turned around. It was all Cubs. But there were people who were aggravated because when that foul ball that went near the same area that Bartman had reached over, and he sort of made it wasn't even a direct reference, but he was intimating, that gee whiz, he was adding some. I didn't see drama to it, but he was just adding some history to it in a sense. And I heard people just, oh, my God, did he have to say that? And I'm like, I didn't see anything wrong with that. Do you?
No,
not at all.
No, there's nothing wrong with that. And I got to give Buck credit. And I don't think Joe Buck is horrible.
No, he's not a horrible caller of the game.
No, he's not or for any game that he does. If you hear when they turned that double play, and you heard the excitement in Buck's voice, that was genuine.
Yeah, definitely.
That was genuine.
Definitely.
And I thought that was really, really good. Break time. Wake up, John.
I'm going to listen to this message. He says.
You are listening to Armchair Experts from the John DeVita Broadcast Center on Jack FM 89.7 WRHS FM Norwich and the Windy City Hometown Entertainment Network on Wednesday, October the 26th, the year 2016, with Jim Leon and Rich Massaro. And this is Jack-O-Lantern FM 89.7 WRHS FM Norwich. And now, back to Jim Leon and Rich Massaro and Armchair Experts.
All right. Thank you there, Doctor. What's your Dr. DeVita, Doctor of the Dials, what's your feelings on the series?
Well, I hope that the Cubs take it, gentlemen. I was sitting up in Wisconsin Saturday night, and I watched the game, and I got kind of nervous there in the top of the ninth inning when they walked that one guy. And my sister said, "Oh no, don't tell me they're going to walk." I says, "No." I says, "What they're going to do? The next guy is going to pop up, and they're going to have a double play." And sure enough, and there it was.
Ooh!
And
John, you want to? Breeders' Cup is coming up the first weekend of November. You want to go to the track with me?
No, that's quite okay. But anyways, it's been a long time coming. I mean, 71 years. God Almighty, that's a long time, to get into a World Series. So, actually, I really rooting for them. What I am happy for, really, is that tonight and tomorrow night they'll be playing in Cleveland. And then, of course, Thursday is an off night. And then Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So if they do win the World Series, which I hope they do, they'll win it in their own stadium.
I am hoping that there's no weather delays and anything else, and there's a possibility that if it goes to Game 5, and it could be a clinching game, that'll be on Sunday. And Sunday is my birthday.
Ooh, that would really be good. Yeah.
And
wow.
I have my Twitter post and my Facebook post all worked out in my mind already.
Oh my goodness!
Best birthday present ever.
That's right.
Wow,
yeah,
that's for sure.
Well, like I said, gentlemen, I'm really rooting for the Cubs. I'm hoping they get it, and let's just keep thinking positive.
John, when you said 71 years, I meet a gentleman by the name of Andy Seashan on Sunday mornings, and we just sit and talk, and Andy's a Cubs fan, and he says to me, he goes, "Rich," he says, "the last time the Cubs were in the World Series," he says, "I was four months old." And I'm like, and that really, because I'm sitting there, and Andy had several physical issues. He's on a walker most of the time, and he's a nice guy. But I'm thinking, holy cripe, that sort of put it in big time perspective. Because we sit here and we'll say, well, that happened before we were even born. Here's a guy who's a Cubs fan and said, "I was 4 months old the last time they were in the series."
Yeah, and a good friend of mine, Lori Beard, lives up in Grand Rapids, but grew up in Springfield, is just a absolute diehard Cub fan, and was in town for the game on Saturday. And she posted a picture yesterday of her and her son and her dad in 2003, and that was the last game her dad saw. Her dad's been gone 10 years now. And he was on a ship in 1945 and listened to the game on Armed Forces Radio. Mm-hmm. My dad was fortunate enough. My dad got out probably August or September. I can't remember the date, in 45 after the war was over. I think my dad was stationed in Europe, in the European theater. He never served in the Pacific, so he was pretty much done. and came home, and a friend of his who was was part of their crew on their plane, a friend of his from Oklahoma came up, and they went to one of the games in the World Series. So my dad's dream was always that my dad and I would get to go to a World Series game. And in '59, we ordered tickets. Yeah, it was the White Sox, but hey, it was the World Series, and my dad wanted us to go. Didn't get them. Weren't able to go. Obviously, '69 broke our hearts.
Sure.
My dad's been gone. My dad's been gone 45 years now, and he would have sat and enjoyed this.
There was a couple things I was going to say as you're talking, Jim. Dan Romito, who was a good friend of mine, and obviously I don't know if John ever met Dan, but he was a Cubs fan, and he used to tell me, because Dan was, I don't know how many, we were friends, I don't know how many years older Dan was than I, but a few. And he said he and 45 went down to Wrigley Field to try to get in. I don't know if they might have had general admission tickets.
Probably in those days.
And I don't even remember if he said he got in to see one of the games or not, but he on occasion would recall that. The other thing I was going to say is, and I'm going to refer back to, you mentioned what everybody looks at as the collapse of '69, and you mentioned the '64 Phillies. But as years have gone by, and there are Cub fans, that I think are delusional. I would say to people, the more I look back on '69, the more I'm thinking the fact that the Mets caught the Cubs wasn't that surprising. Because when I start to look at those two teams, I'm thinking, I think the Mets, thanks, John, in a lot of respects, were the more World Series ready team. And obviously they were, because they won it. But, I mean, if you look at the pitching, after Fergie, we had Bill Hands, and then it was fairly sketchy, I'd say, after that.
Holtzman, I think, was on the weekends then, wasn't
because he was in the National Guard.
He was in the National Guard.
But, I mean, you look at the Mets, who they had. I mean, you had Seaver and Ryan and Koosman and Gentry had a really good year.
Yeah.
They had good relief. But I think where I really look at the big difference is, now hitting-wise, I think the Cubs were superior. But when I look at the Mets' defense with Agee in center versus, say, Hickman, no disrespect to Kessinger and Beckert, but, you had Weiss and Harrelson.
Weiss and Harrelson up the middle.
That's why they were there. They weren't hitters. They were magicians with the glove.
Right.
So, it wasn't like
Clendenin was the first. Was Clendenin the first baseman?
Clendenin was the first baseman and had a big. I mean, he was a guy who seemed to thrive on the big moments.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is where, just recently in all sports, it seems that the writers that I read anyway sort of poo-poo the gritty types of teams. But you know what? The Mets obviously were a gritty team because they weren't like a glamour team in any respect, I don't think.
No. And you know what? You come down, what was it? They won 37 out of their last 44 or something.
Yeah, that's hard to hold off.
It's really hard to beat.
Yeah, I mean, when you have a team winning 37 out of 44, you better be winning a lot of games yourself.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
But I don't want to get onto
the curse, another curse,
history and all of that. But as you were talking about your experiences, those couple things were in my mind.
Yeah, I was thinking, just talking about you mentioned about Dan going down and trying to get into the ballpark. Good buddy of mine, Jim O'Brien, and I went to Game 2 of the '84 playoffs. We didn't have tickets. Jim lived downtown, and I went over to his place, and I said, "Listen," I said, "I don't know what the crowd is going to be like or whatever." I said, "I'm going to leave my wallet and my credit cards here." I said, "I'm just going to take an ID," and I said, "I got about $160 in my pocket." And he goes, "Okay, I got about $75. And we were going to walk up and catch the subway at Chicago and Michigan." He said, let's stop. There was and back in those days, it was First National Bank of Chicago. Let's stop at the First National Bank so I can get some money out of the ATM. Mm-hmm. So we went over to the cash machine, and as we're walking, he is feverishly going through his wallet and going, oh my God, I lost my card. He said, the other night when they clinched, I came up here, got some cash, jumped on the L. He said, I bet you I left my card in the machine, and it got swallowed up, and it hadn't got back to him. So he says, can I use yours? He says, where's yours? I said, like I told you, in my wallet on your kitchen table. He said, okay. He said, how much you got? I said, I got about $160. He said, okay, I've got like 75. He said, let's see what we can do with that. Mm-hmm. So we jump on the L. Some guy offered us 2 box seats for, $300.
Okay.
And Jim is a stockbroker. He immediately handed him his card and said, if you can get that price, call me. Mm-hmm. He said, we should talk about some investments.
Yeah.
We get to the ballpark, and I've never experienced anything like that. I mean, we walked around, we started looking around. Everybody was looking to buy. Mm-hmm. Nobody was selling.
Yeah.
I mean, I even saw guys, and it was obvious that they were traders from the Merc and all that, because they were using the hand signals.
Okay.
As to what they were looking for.
What year was this, Jim?
84.
84. Okay.
We walked around the front of the park, and one guy had standing room for 75 apiece. And O'Brien said, no, I'm going to pass. Let's pass on that. Let's see if we can do better. So we walked around again, and we walked up to Waveland Avenue. Mm-hmm. Nobody was selling. We're looking out there, and he and I had gone to games before where we didn't have a ticket, and we always managed to find a ticket.
Sure.
And he's going, we're not. He's at this point now. We've gone around half the park, and he's going, we're not going to get in. I said, well, you know what? If we don't get in, I said, there's Murphy's right over there. I said, and there's a curb here. I said, damn it. There's beer, there's a curb, there's a ball game. I'll stand here.
Yeah.
And experience it.
Sure.
I said, but let's take one more lap. And we went up Sheffield, nobody. Make the turn on the Addison again and start walking towards the main gate. And I'm passed by these best way to describe them, 2 old rummies.
Okay.
And one guy said to one of them, he said, no, not for that price. And by this time the game has started. And I spun around and I said, what do you got? I said, what do you got and what do you want? He goes, well, I got 2 grades. I said, tell me where the seats are. Mm-hmm. Grandstand, section 235, or whatever. I said, what do you want for them? He said, $100 a piece. And there's this guy standing alongside him goes, I'll give you $125 a piece for those. And I looked at him and I said, listen, I'm not going to get in an argument with 2 old rummies, especially with one of them as the fact that shilling, trying to get the price up.
Yeah.
$100 a piece, I'll pay it, take it or leave it.
Yeah.
And he looked at me, he kind of swallowed and looked at me and looked at the other guy and goes, no, I want to sell it to these 2 boys right here. And I pull $150 out of my wallet, out of my pocket. Mm-hmm. And I looked at O'Brien, and O'Brien is scrunching up his face like, and I said, you got a $50 bill in your pocket. I won't say the word.
Yeah.
Give it to me.
Yeah.
And he gave it to me, and I handed him. We grabbed the tickets. We sprinted to the front gate. We walked in the front gate. There's, a hot dog stand on one side, beer on the other. I can't remember which of us did which. Mm-hmm. One, you get the hot dogs, I'll get the beer or whatever. And we did that, and when we got back, we exchanged. So each had a hot dog, each had a beer, and I looked at him and I said, I have $3 in my pocket.
Oh, jeez.
He said, That's airfare home. Don't do anything with it. He said, all right, I got about maybe 15 bucks left, 15, 20 bucks left. Let's see what we can do today with that. So we had our seats. We went up to our seats. We were like in the last row of the grandstand, down the right field line, watch the game. I think we managed another beer, maybe another hot dog during the game.
Was that the first game, Jim?
Game 2.
Oh, 2. Okay.
We managed another beer, another hot dog, maybe during the game, and they won the ball game. We're delirious. Henry, who was it that caught the final out? Henry Cotto against
Could have been. He was
against the
probably on
wall.
team.
Yeah, against the wall. And they're going 2 wins. All they got to do is win one more. We're gonna, And the chant was starting at that point in time. Padres and Tigers and Royals. Who cares? And he goes, let's just, he says, I got enough left. Maybe we can go over to Murphy's and have a beer. And we're walking around, and I never saw a crowd that was, probably Saturday night was much more delirious.
Mm-hmm.
But the crowd, the way it was, and it was so happy. And we got over to Murphy's, and people are standing outside, and the whole intersection is blocked off, and everybody's having a party, and people are singing. Mm-hmm. And I got to one point where I jumped up on a tree, on a tree thing that they had, where trees planted along the street, and I stood up and I yelled, "All right, let me hear you, good and loud." And the whole intersection turned towards me, and we sang "Take Me Out to the Ball Game."
Oh, jeez.
And I've had 2 beers.
That's it.
That was it. I think I had one more in my hand. And there were a bunch of people that were along the fence at in the building next to Murphy's. We were all having a good time, and I never did find out the connection, but there were 2 guys there who were from England. And they were having the best time, and they had sticks from Penance. And they were trying to sell them, since that was the popular movie at that time, as Padres Ghostbuster pennants.
Okay.
And they're walking by, and they're tapping people on their batting helmets or on the shoulders, going, "Would you like to buy this Padres Ghostbuster pennant?" And I finally looked at him. I said, this ain't London. This ain't Piccadilly Square. You're in Chicago. You got to be a little more forceful from that. The next guy, he goes, "Oh, I think you're right." And the next guy that walked by took the stick, hit him over the head, and went, "Yo, you want to buy this?" And we got to there, and it was just so much fun. And as the crowd was starting to break up, and we all promised that, we're coming back for the World Series, we'll be there for the World Series. Mm. Somebody who had been kind of hanging around with us, he and his wife, his girlfriend, whatever, came up to us, and they said, I can't remember any time I've had so much fun after a game. He said, all the laughing, all the singing, and all that. Could we, do one more song? And we said, "One more song?" And she said, "Yes, your best song." And with that, the 2 guys from England took off their Cub batting helmets, held them over their heart, and sang "God Save the Queen."
Oh, jeez. Hey, Jim, let me ask you this. Is this, I'm sitting there watching the final game with my wife, and guys would say, "Geez, you didn't go to the bar. You didn't." There's nobody more fun to watch these big events, because she is so into it, than my wife. And she just goes crazy. She's sitting there with the remote saying, won't this thing go any louder? I mean, it's like you're there.
Well, when you called me, I thought you were in a bar, actually.
No, I wasn't. So anyway, what was I going to say about this? She says to me, she goes, this is, if they win the series, this will be the biggest thing ever. And she says, it'll be bigger than the 85 Bears. It'll be bigger than the Hawks or the Bulls.
Yeah.
And I said, you're absolutely right. I said, there is going to be nothing bigger
Joe
if they
Madden.
win this.
Joe Madden will never have to buy dinner again.
For sure. But the other thing I was going to say is actually for one of the playoff games I was at Lasers, and there's a couple that comes in. I've never really made their acquaintance, and they're big Cubs and Hawks fans. They always have jerseys on. So I end up talking to this woman who I've never talked to before for a couple minutes. And she says, I'm 68 years old, and I've been a Cubs fan. And I said, you know what's really interesting about this whole series of, the season's starting, and then the 5-game playoff, now the 7-game playoff. In previous playoffs, regardless of what the year, something would happen right off the bat that would make me really nervous and like, okay, this is not going to go good. And I said, this year, I've never been nervous the whole time. And she says, that's really weird because that same thing has happened to me. In previous years, I'd always be thinking, this is going to go bad. This year, it's not like that. Have you experienced anything similar?
I would start to get that nervous Cub fan feeling at times.
Mm-hmm.
I would suddenly, I suddenly kind of thought, well, I think there was one game, one of the games against the Dodgers. I texted you and I said, well, can't win if you don't hit.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. We were getting shut down big time.
Yeah. And I kind of looked at it and said, okay, enjoy the ride. And I'm kind of flipping back and here, and there's two things I wanted to show you. My darling wife, a lot of things, because I was going berserk with this. I did. I don't know if anybody saw the clip. Somebody caught Bill Murray in the stands at the final out, and he did a lot of things that everybody did. He cried.
Mm-hmm.
You could see that. My wife, and I find this here. My wife. I put that on.
There you go.
My wife took a picture of me. That is a game-worn jersey.
Okay.
From 2000.
Who wore it? Lee Smith?
Ray King. So if you remember,
he was
He was a
a pitcher, right?
pitcher.
Left-handed pitcher.
Yeah, I think so. If you remember Ray King, I think that jersey probably has more victories with me wearing it
Than what Ray King.
than when Ray King wore it. But there was a, and I got to go back and look at it. I know he's posted a lot, and I'll have to go back and find it. But Matt Spiegel, and it was really kind of a sweet post. Matt is a single dad raising his boy, who's I think probably 4 or 5 years old, and he after one of the games with the Dodgers, after the game with the Dodgers, where it really looked bleak and everybody's going, oh God, this is over. Mm-hmm. He posted his son's name is Ruben. He goes, here's the conversation. Ruben, the Cubs lost last night. As he wakes up his little boy. And Ruben goes, oh no, how? He said, they didn't hit the ball. People are scared, Ru. How can they not be scared? Mm. And Ruben said, people should close their eyes and take deep breaths like this. And he demonstrated it. And he said, see? And he smiled. Mm. And he posted, I'm with him.
There you go. Jim, I have to ask you. You brought up Ray King.
Yeah.
Can you name 2 other players whose last name were King that played for the Cubs? And I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm talking Dave Kingman.
No, I wasn't thinking Dave Kingman. There was another guy, Jim King.
Jim King was one, but there's one more obscure than Jim King even, or Ray King.
Can't get much more obscure than Ray King, but I can't think of it.
Chick King.
Chick King?
Chick King.
Oh, how?
He was back.
Yeah, I was going to say
he had a cup of coffee in the late 50s.
Okay,
outfielder.
I was going to put him in the 40s.
I think I had his baseball card. Now the interesting thing, if you want to, and I was thinking about this as we went on the air. In 45, and I believe this is because the rosters, because of the war was just ending, I guess. So the rosters were expanded, I believe. They probably had a 28-man roster.
Good question. I don't know.
The Cubs actually carried 4 catchers that year. And
Clyde
there was a lot of
McCullough.
talk.
Clyde McCullough was one of them.
Clyde McCullough. And I'll tell you, Clyde McCullough, actually, I looked at his career. A very good,
He was a good catcher.
very good player.
Good ball player.
I don't remember the other ones, and it's not important. But I thought it was interesting. I would have to think the Cubs might be the only team in the majors who are carrying 3 catchers. And I thought maybe when the playoffs came, that would change. But I've been struck by the uniqueness of each of our catchers and the how integral they are to the success of our team. David Ross obviously catches John Lester.
He'll catch him
He's become
tonight.
somewhat of a folk hero in
Oh,
Chicago.
yeah.
Miguel Montero, obviously, he catches, who's it, Arrieta?
He'll catch Arrieta.
And Wilson Contreras, of course, the catcher of the future and the present, because he's been a big contributor.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
and really, all 3 of those guys have been key guys in winning these 2 series.
Yeah, I mean, they tied, the 3 of them tied a record for catchers hitting home runs in a postseason series. 3 catchers, I think it happened the last time with the Diamondbacks. And
Okay.
I think it A's maybe. I remember reading it. It's an interesting, very interesting put together ball club.
It is.
Yeah, if you have an opportunity and want to poke around, if you go out and look at the score and listen to some podcasts, I think between the 4 and 5 o'clock hour last night on Bernstein, Bors and Bernstein, they had media day. They had the media day interview with Joe Madden. Good Lord, that man is interesting. He can.
Is a very well spoken.
Oh my gosh, talking about the people that influenced him in his game as a manager, going back to the guy that probably was the first influence on him was, and going back when he was in the Angels organization, and there was Gene Mauch.
Yeah, very intelligent baseball man.
He said that a very intelligent baseball man, and he said it was so interesting. You could be in a room with your back to the door, and Mauch would come into the room, and you could sense his presence. That type of guy.
Mm-hmm.
Talked about some of the other people that influenced him along the way, and just a really, really interesting. I mean, a couple of good interviews yesterday. That one, listening to the media day, and they had Jed Hoyer on and talked about him and talked about the decision-making process, especially how what they were going to do with Schwarber. Mm-hmm. And he said, "Well, we'll meet afterwards and we'll talk about it.
Yeah, we'll decide when we decide.
We'll decide when we decide."
Yeah.
And the fact that the decision process is something that you want to be on board with it, because he said if we have something and we're real sure about it, and somebody comes in and says, "Oh no, can't do that," no, then you got to start to look at your own process again,
Right.
and look at what he's saying, look at what that person is saying, to decide, well, maybe we aren't making the right decision.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a little bit surprised at Schwarber, but I guess the issue is how good is his timing?
Well, that's I would say that's the big issue. And if they're convinced that it's okay, let's put it this way, Jim. I guess you have to weigh it maybe against who would be the DH.
Yeah.
If Schwarber didn't play.
Yeah.
The other thing is
Probably Soler.
Well, here's the thing.
But
I was
just going to say the Indians
are right-handed heavy.
Yeah, they're
pitching-wise.
right-handed heavy. Yeah.
So then you're probably looking at Coghlan, and I think part of the process is you want to maybe have Coghlan for defense late in the game as opposed to him being an extra hitter. Or I suppose you could, although we have a good defensive outfield, so you could maybe go another way. But I think when you really sit down and think about it, you can see what their thinking is. Coghlan can be that defensive guy late in the game still. And, even if you don't get anything out of Schwarber, I hate to say it this way, but you may not have gotten much out of whoever the alternative would have been anyway.
Right. You hope that when we look back on this after this series is over, we don't look at it and say, well, you should have carried an extra pitcher.
No, I'd be the last person to ever say that.
Yeah.
I just don't see that.
I don't see it.
And put it this way, if we are saying that, something bad has happened anyway, because what the Cubs are banking on, obviously, is to their pitchers have gone deep into games, which has helped them tremendously.
Oh, yeah.
What I'm sort of hoping might happen to the Indians was exactly what happened to the Dodgers, because I think Smoltz was hitting it. I really like John Smoltz as the color guy on the national broadcast, because pitching is so much of the game, and he knows pitching very well. And, when he said, geez, Roberts has done the best he can, but he's in a situation where this may be just the effect of him having to go to that bullpen way too often over the course of the year,
course of the season.
This whole thing
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
And other than Kenley Jansen, I think you saw that. I mean, Joe Blanton was very effective for them, and all of a sudden in the playoffs, his slider was rolling up there. We had got a couple of big knocks off of him that were key ones, and I just think their bullpen had, was out of mileage, I guess you could say.
Yeah. We talk about that one game where they came back, Cubs came back, and Madden overmanaged and almost got caught.
Yeah.
Got lucky.
Yeah.
But Roberts, I thought, if you just look at the box scores and look at everything, and you don't, maybe you have to go back and look at play-by-play, but good Lord, Roberts was just moving him in and out. And you're right. He had to go to the bullpen more often. And I think they just finally wore down.
Well, here's where, and I'm not trying to down talk Dave Roberts, because I
No,
think he
great
was
man.
the,
Oh, God.
manager of the year in the
Oh,
NL in my estimation.
Man, with what he did, with what he was dealt,
Right.
and all the problems that year,
But
this
in
year.
game 5, I'm sitting there watching the game with Tommy, my son, and Cubs are up 3-1, and Roberts brings in it's Pedro. Is it Pedro Baez?
Pedro Baez.
And without going into detail, he struggled. And I'm sitting there watching, and I'm thinking to myself, why is he not bringing Jansen in? So I verbalized this, and Tommy goes, well, it's not a save situation. I said, Tom, they're ready to go get down 3-2 and go back to Chicago. Forget the save situation. You got to keep this score right here at 3-1 if you're the Dodgers. Why is he not in the game? And Baez, I think, must have pitched to 6 or 7 batters, and finally he took him out. And I'm thinking, okay, he's going to bring in Jansen. Well, they bring in Stripling.
Yeah.
I'm like, you know what? As far as I'm concerned, I'm not saying he blew the game, because I don't know that they would have come back anyway. They scored a few runs, but that was because Strop and Chapman were just throwing the ball over and basically really not that much into it, because the game wasn't close. So you can't say that those 4 runs would have meant anything. I don't think you can speculate on that. But I'm thinking to myself, geez, this is unbelievable. Why does he not have Jansen in there?
Mm-hmm.
And you saw what Jansen did the night that we clinched.
Sure.
I mean, he came in and threw 3 innings of lights-out baseball.
Absolutely.
So that was the one big question I had for Roberts.
There was a couple of things that I heard along the way, and there is another article that I'd have to go back and look for to find. Maybe next time we get together we'll talk about it. But talk about how everything really came together.
Mm-hmm.
almost like a 6 degrees of separation involving Clayton Kershaw. A couple of years ago, Dodgers were in the playoff against the Cardinals. Kershaw had a hard time in a deciding game against, I think it was the deciding game against the Cardinals.
Mm-hmm.
Cardinals eliminated the Dodgers. After that, Ned Colletti was essentially moved out of his role as general manager,
Mm-hmm.
moved into an advisory role. Andrew Friedman was hired away from Tampa Bay to become the general manager, director of baseball operations, whatever, president of baseball operations for the Dodgers. An option kicked in on Joe Maddon's contract when Andrew Friedman left,
Right.
that he was able to walk away from Tampa Bay. Obviously, everybody thought that he was going to head to the Dodgers, but he came to the Cubs.
Right.
So that was one thing. There's another thing talking about certain things that had to happen in 2011. All of them almost happened simultaneously, and it was like a $278 million to 1 shot that, Boston bombed and missed the playoffs. Francona got fired. Epstein left, and that's when everything started to happen here.
But think about this, Jim. This is how I don't think that's. I'm not going to say it's the norm, but I think of think of when the Lakers.
Yeah.
Okay, the Lakers with Jerry West, right? They draft Kobe Bryant, who was 17 years old.
Yeah.
And it looked like there was no chance that they were going to be able to get Shaq, but they pulled. And I can't give you all the particulars, but this was West's plan, although it was a long shot on everything, and it came together. So sometimes, the serendipity is there.
Oh, that's right. That's right. I love it. As he used to say on TV, I love it when a plan comes together.
Yeah.
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 So, all right. We get down to the final moments here. We're over.
We're past the final.
We're past the final moments.
Look at John. He's saying, when are these guys getting out of here? So
predictions?
I say the Cubs in 5.
I'm hoping 5 because I have a selfish reason, especially if Game 5 does fall on my birthday, but I'm going to say the Cubs in 6.
Okay.
There's where we are. And by the way, I had forgotten about it until I got an email. There's an offshore betting site, Top Bet. I put $5 on the Cubs to win the pennant.
Hey, well, how much are you going to get back? A buck?
Well, I think my winnings my winnings were I got my bet back and $16.25 more.
Oh, so this was just for to get into the series
to win the pennant.
The, National League pennant.
Yeah, to win the pennant. Now I got to go see if I can't remember. I got to go see if I bet them to win the World Series too.
Okay. Good luck.
I'll see how that one goes. Hey, this was fun. Give us a chance to talk some baseball on a day that is pretty doggone exciting. I'd say as the Cubs tonight. This is Tuesday as we're doing this tonight. Open up in the World Series tomorrow. Game 2, and then the weekend here in Chicago. So I think maybe the next time we get together, we'll have a little more baseball to talk about. But until that's time, crank up the music there, Doctor. Oh, no, John. No. No. Come on, John.
On behalf of the entire staff of the John DeVito Broadcast Center, the Windy City Hometown Entertainment Network, and WRHS, we want to wish you a very, very happy birthday, Jim.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Happy birthday, Jim.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. My Medicare birthday. Good Lord, what a trauma. Ooh, you what are you going, ooh, yours is a couple of weeks later.
I understand it.
Yours is a couple of weeks later.
That's right.
All right. In the meantime, thanks for the good wishes there, Doctor. Thanks for your help as always. Thanks to my partner, Rich. We always have fun getting together and doing this, carrying on conversations we started in 1967.
Yeah.
As we dreamed of this day where we'd see our Cubs in the World Series. But in the meantime, we'll catch you all on the next time. We are Taillights.
You have been listening to Armchair Experts from the John DeVito Broadcast Center on Wednesday, October the 26th, the year 2016, on Jack FM 89.7 WRHS FM Norwich and the Windy City Hometown Entertainment Network with Jim Leon and Rich Massaro. This broadcast was directed by John DeVita. Our special thanks to radio station manager Kevin Zeflik of WRHS FM Norwich and the executive producer of Windy City Hometown Entertainment Network, Mr. John Chikanda. This broadcast was pre-recorded on Tuesday, October the 25th, the year 2016. Until next time, be safe and thanks for listening. And this is Jack O'Lantern FM, 89.7 WRHS FM, Norwich, Illinois.